Hell of a day, hell of a day. That was wild. So, no Harbaugh, Kevin O'Connell's in, the head coaching search has been completed. We know who the head coach is. We can start to dive into the guy here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Let's recap everything.
Ooh-wee! You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at LukeBraunNFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Today's episode is brought to you by GetUpside. Just download the free GetUpside app and use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get 25 cents per gallon or more cash back on your first tank. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Holy crap. That was a day, huh? If you were following the Jim Harbaugh saga for all of Wednesday, you are probably exhausted this morning. Get some rest, some coffee if you drink that, drink water, take care of yourself. If you missed it, let me fill you in on what went down and my understanding of why everything went down. But the headline is Jim Harbaugh ain't going to be the coach. That didn't work out. No offer was levied. I don't know if an offer would have been accepted anyways. Didn't work out. They decided they didn't want to work together. They are going to the next guy on the list, which is Kevin O'Connell. Kevin O'Connell, from what I understand, was going to be the guy if Harbaugh wasn't the guy. It seemed like after they did the Kevin O'Connell and Patrick Graham and Raheem Morris interviews that Kevin O'Connell had come out clearly on top of that group. I hope they didn't make that decision before the Raheem Morris and Patrick Graham interviews. Obviously, that would be a little bit of a problem considering what's going on around the league, but I can't really speak to that one way or the other, so I won't. But really, the expectation going into Wednesday was that Jim Harbaugh would be the head coach, that he was going to take it, and all we had to do was kind of have a good interview here, and if everything was hunky-dory, they were going to kind of have a deal done probably like this morning. But it didn't work out that way. So why that happened is one big matter of discussion, but I want to spend most of the show talking about Kevin O'Connell. We leave the Harbaugh thing behind. So that was kind of fun to dream about for a while. I had a lot of fun talking about it. Today's show was going to be Jim Harbaugh's scheme history and all of the running games that he did at Stanford and then San Francisco and then Michigan and how he's adapted and all that stuff. And it was going to be a super X's and O's show. And obviously that's moot, so we're not going to do that. But I did write the same research in article form if you are interested in that or if you're a Michigan fan or something. So first, let's talk about why this didn't work out. And really centrally here, it seemed that there was a miscommunication where Jim Harbaugh thought that this was a coronation, and the Vikings thought that this was a consideration, that this was a true blue job interview that said, look, we're going to bring you in, we're going to compare and contrast you to all the other candidates, we're going to decide who the head coach is going to be. You have not gotten the job yet, you got to come in and you got to earn it. And a lot of that was because of skepticism on the ownership side. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah loves Jim Harbaugh. If it were up to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah 100%, probably would have just gone and hired Jim Harbaugh. But it's not up to Kwesi 100% because ownership also has a stake. And I think part of the reason that they hired Kwesi is because he's not a guy that's going to try to grab that singular authority. He is somebody that's going to say, yeah. If you have an opinion, I'm going to listen to it. And that's not a contentious dynamic. That's part of what made Kwesi the GM candidate that they wanted. So there's nothing contentious about that. Where there is contention is between a minority stakeholder by the name of Jim Stapleton, who in 2005 bought enough of the Vikings to actually have a say in these matters. He's a member of the Wilfs ownership group, along with Mark and Ziggy and a few other people. And he is also a Michigan booster and a big Eastern Michigan guy. And there is some ancient beef there that I'm not going to go into. But John Bacon, who covers Michigan and was really good on the beat for all of this, has a couple of books on the history of Michigan and and a lot of the drama that went down here. Suffice to say, there's some beef. and Jim Stapleton hates Jim Harbaugh. So obviously there was going to be some concern there. And so he brings those concerns up to the Wilfs. And also Kwesi says, no. It's not like it was all Jed York and Balky. It's not Harbaugh's fault at all. Like, he's fine. And so then you bring him in, and the Wilfs bring him in and say, okay, let's talk to the guy and let's see where we end up on this. And it seems like they ended up on the side of the detractors. But I've seen a lot of assumptions around about what the Patrick Graham interview meant, what the Harbaugh interview meant, whether or not they had really made a decision or whatever. The Wilfs went into this Harbaugh interview not knowing who their head coach was, not knowing who a favorite was or anything like that. That is the sense that I get from reading all the other reports and sourced information that the wonderful beat journos have done, and they all did a great job. Courtney Cronin, Chad Graff, all of them, all the other names that I'm totally forgetting, Pelissero, everybody. They all did awesome work on all of this, super on top of the beat, and bringing all of this together is, I guess, what I can do for you. And the sense I get from doing that is that the Wilfs genuinely didn't know what they were going to do, but the interview didn't go well enough. And it sounds like the reason for that is because Jim Harbaugh thought the job was his. Ian Rappaport even reported that much. Like, he expects to waltz in and the job's going to be his, and this is basically going to be a big formality, and it's going to be more coronation than interview. And I think that misunderstanding didn't really go down very well for either side, because the Wilfs saw that and said, hey, why are you so cocky about this, right? Like, if you are sitting there trying to evaluate someone and they're strutting in like they already own the place, that might not really come across very well. And on the other side, Jim Harbaugh walks in thinking this job is mine, and then realizes that there are a bunch of people in the group that aren't 100% sold on him, and is he going to have the full support of the team and all of that? And so it doesn't go well, especially when push comes to shove, when it comes to like answering questions about the end of his San Francisco tenure and how that all got really toxic. This whole misunderstanding happens, and it sounds like a very awkward way to spend a 9-hour interview, a very awkward way to spend like an all-day interview. So after that experience, which sounds like it wasn't very pleasant, honestly, they all got together and said, this isn't going to work. And this is the first time that these people have met in person with Jim Harbaugh. And a big like test of this interview, a big purpose of this interview is to kind of gauge out, do I want to work with this guy for years and years? And that's both Jim Harbaugh saying, do I want to work with this group? And the ownership and Kwesi and all these guys saying, do I want to work with this crazy dude? And they all kind of said, yeah, this didn't work out. I don't think I want to marry myself to this. And I guess good thing that they realized that before they married themselves to that, and then would be a lot more awkward to get out of. But of course, big bummer. We all got our hopes up, right? And so that's all very sad. So instead, the guy ends up being Kevin O'Connell. Now, I've already kind of talked about Kevin O'Connell. I did one segment on him in a show where I covered 3 different coaching candidates I did not want. And I still am pretty negative on this, but I'm going to cover it pretty neutral. I'm going to give the guy a chance, right? I'll tell you why I'm negative. I'll tell you like what my cons are, but there are also pros. Like, this is all complicated and nuanced and stuff. We'll get into all of that. But first, look, if you buy gas, you need to know about Get Upside. You can earn cash back for every gallon of gas every time you fill up. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play. Use promo code TOUCHDOWN. You can get 25 cents per gallon or more on your first fill up. That's cash back. You're not paying full price at the pump anymore. It just tells you what gas stations are participating. You go over, fill up, take a picture of your receipt. Money just shows right up in your account. 25 cents per gallon or more on your first tank. You can pull that money out whenever and however you want. There's nothing, PayPal, e-gift card, or Amazon or whatever. You can just cash out right to your bank account if you'd rather do that. Once again, that's promo code TOUCHDOWN for 25 cents per gallon or more cash back on your first tank. That's promo code TOUCHDOWN with the Get Upside app. Thanks so much again for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Harbaugh disappointment aside, I'm pretty disappointed. I was hype on Harbaugh. I'm a little bummed out about it. And I don't really love the O'Connell pick. I'll get to why in a second. But I want to start with the good things, because those are still there. And let me try to explain why the Vikings were so in on Kevin O'Connell, why they chose him over Graham or Raheem Morris, or would they have chosen him over D'Amico Ryans? I kind of think they would have, and anybody else. Kevin O'Connell has had, among league people, a reputation for a while. You might think of him as a newcomer to the coaching scene because you probably haven't heard about him much from the outside as much, but like inside the league, people who have worked with him, everybody swears by this guy. Everybody absolutely raves. about this guy, and particularly just his football smarts and knowledge. Now, that's kind of a thing you're going to hear about just about everybody who goes into the head coaching search. Like, you kind of don't get to this point without having a reputation for being a really smart football guy, especially as like the offensive coordinator type. But basically, here's what this hire is. And honestly, it is what a lot of people were clamoring for. And I was not necessarily as crazy on the offensive guy thing, but I know a lot of you were. This is your guy. One way that I've put it on a couple of other shows that I've gone on to explain is, if you take every reason that Mike Zimmer got fired, didn't work enough with the quarterback, didn't pay enough attention to the offense, he was old and out of date or whatever, and he was crotchety, and he didn't get along with and he didn't have a good enough relationship with his players, and he wasn't like innovative offensively enough. Like, take all of those things and cram those traits that you wanted that he didn't have into one person, it would be Kevin O'Connell. Like, it is the absolute most let us hire the guy that is opposite of the guy we just fired hire ever. There is, of course, a previous relationship that he has with Kirk Cousins. He was his quarterback's coach in Washington for a year. He also called plays for a hot second in Washington as an interim guy when they were going through a coaching change. And then he spent the last 2 years as offensive coordinator in LA for Sean McVay. And let me try to explain what his job there was, because there is some confusion over that, but Sean McVay has more or less told us what that job is. If you think about the idea of coming up with a game plan, right? You have a menu of plays. They're a big old laminated card. It looks like a Denny's menu, and they pick off of that, right? Now, Sean McVay called the plays in an official capacity. He was the play caller in those Los Angeles Rams team, is the play caller. They're still going. Which is also a thing that we have to think about now. So Sean McVay is the play caller. So you might be like, wait, what does Kevin O'Connell even do? Why'd we hire him? So quarterback's coach extraordinaire. If you hear Matt Stafford talk about him, his current quarterback, it's very much, I think he still kind of has that quarterback coach role, where he's implementing. He is taking the scheme that they are going to run, and he is ensuring that Matt Stafford is going to run it properly. That's part of his job, is to get Matt Stafford to properly execute the scheme, to understand the points and the progressions, to understand when to check into this or alert into that, and those kind of complicated things. But the other job he has is a tactical one. He is drawing plays. He is coming up with what's this defense's weakness and how do we attack it? He is the guy that and if you hear Sean McVay tell it, Sean McVay will kind of be like, yeah, he kind of drew up everything, and this is really his offense if you really think about it. And I think he's just gassing up his guy. Obviously, it's still very much Sean McVay's offense, and all this work he did, he's doing under Sean McVay's supervision, and outside of Sean McVay's supervision, there's kind of no telling what would change. What does Kevin O'Connell disagree with Sean McVay on? Very interesting question, and I guess we'll find out when we compare and contrast the two offenses next year. But a lot of the concepts that they run are in that playbook because Kevin O'Connell said this is going to be a good one this week. And then Sean McVay takes that menu. If you think, Kevin O'Connell's writing the menu, and on game day, Sean McVay is actually sequencing them and making the higher level decisions, and probably has some more high level control over the offense and stuff because he's the head coach. So as head coach, Kevin O'Connell would probably still do a lot of that tactical work and would still be the guy kind of coming up with scheme and coming up with those things, drawing up plays and stuff like that. And what he would actually delegate to his offensive coordinator is, I think, going to become a big talker over the course of the offseason, especially once we find out who that guy is, which we cannot do for a while, which we'll get to that in a second. But once we find out who that guy is, we'll probably kind of find out what he's going to be there for. Because there is nothing wrong with a head coach not calling plays. That is super normal. So if Kevin O'Connell wanted, he could kind of keep his same role where he's a tactician and he's coming up with the plays and he's doing all that, except the head coach version of it where he has final say and he's overseeing and he's not being supervised, right? He could still do that and then hand that carefully crafted menu of plays off to somebody whose job on game day is to feel out the flow of the game and decide what order they're going to be called in, and he can just delegate that work. Personally, I think that would be a good choice. I think there is something to be said for doing your strengths and delegating your weaknesses. What am I not good at? I'm going to hire somebody who's good at that and ask them to do it. And that's how I think the best team can be run. And there's certainly nothing wrong with a head coach not calling plays if that's going to be what happens. But I don't know. It'll be an interesting thing to watch. So he's known as a scheme wizard, and he's known as a he's not like a QB whisperer in the developmental way. Like, he doesn't have really much of a track record for that one way or the other, but more of a QB whisperer in that he's really good at working with quarterbacks and getting quarterbacks to understand what the team is going with and being, in lockstep with the quarterback. The coach and the quarterback are going to have a good relationship. That is, I think, really in the thesis of the hire. Of course, there's also the question, will he keep Kirk Cousins? I don't know the answer to that. Of course, he worked with Kirk Cousins. He has a prior relationship to Kirk Cousins. There was some stuff going around, though, about how, like, when he was in LA and they were trading for Matt Stafford, they were deciding which quarterback they were going to trade for, which they ultimately landed on Stafford. But in that room, I think it was Paul Allen said that Kevin O'Connell wasn't necessarily on the Kirk Cousins train for that, or he was somebody that said maybe not Kirk Cousins, maybe we should trade for Stafford or whatever. So I don't know if Kevin O'Connell actually likes Cousins that much. Maybe that's all a bunch of smoke, and maybe that's wrong. Maybe he totally loves Cousins. Chad Graff has also said that Kevin O'Connell likes Cousins and he thinks that he's going to keep Cousins. I don't really know what's going to happen. I think that's okay personally because it gives me some time to really dive into Kevin O'Connell. But I have my skepticisms about this, and I want to get to those and try to lay them out. Look, I'm not going to spend the next 6 months just complaining about this dude. Let me lay out why I disagree with the hire, why I would have preferred somebody else, get that on the record, and then, cover it neutrally from there on out. But before I get into all of that, quick note, it is Super Week, brought to you by Get Upside. There is no better place to get coverage of the big game than the Locked On NFL podcast. Locked On NFL, and yours truly, Locked On Bengals and Locked On Rams are all going to be in LA all week covering the big game. I also want to talk to you about Grambling on that game. It's Super Bowl season. That means Super Bowl prop season. You got all kinds of crazy stuff. And things like Cooper Kupp over under or whatever, or Joe Burrow, how many passing touchdowns. But also weird stuff like what color will the Gatorade be? Will there be a touchdown drive that is shorter than the national anthem? All kinds of weird stuff. Which of the star-studded halftime show people is going to sing the first song? All that kind of stuff. So that is the kind of thing you can find at betonline.net. It's the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news. Of course, it's not just football. You got basketball, boxing, UFC, live real-time updates of current games, so don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers available for the 2022 season. BetOnline, where the game starts. Let me also talk to you about your car. If you're a do-it-yourselfer, or if you just need to try to get some fixes on your car, maybe you want to save a buck, Rock Auto can help you so much. It's so confusing, though, if you're trying to order your own parts, which is something a lot of mechanics will let you do. You bring in your own part and say, hey, can I just pay you to install this? You can save a little bit of money doing that, but there's so many makes and models and you're going to be worried about getting the wrong thing. Let Rock Auto do all that for you. They have an awesome catalog. You can just type in your make, your year, and your model, save a bunch of money, 30, 50, even 100% savings. For example, like a Honda Odyssey fuel pump, $353 from a chain store, $216 from Rock Auto. And they've been serving do-it-yourselfers online for 20 years. So go explore their easy-to-use website, figure out what you want, and whatever you buy, put Locked On in the How You Heard About Us section so that they know that we sent you. If you don't, the rabbits are going to vandalize exhibits at the Guggenheim, and there's nothing I can do to stop them. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com. All right, so let me try to explain my opinion, I guess, on Kevin O'Connell, and I guess this is the negative. So that was the positives, right? Scheme wizard, very well liked everywhere he goes, seems to be very amicable, easy to work with, relates to players, very focused on the quarterback. We all love all that stuff. Of course, young, offensive, innovative mind, this is the guy we wanted, right? I think maybe my biggest problem with Kevin O'Connell is that I'm worried that he's going to keep Kirk Cousins, and I don't like that. And this is what I've been saying about about Kevin O'Connell. If you are a Kirk lover, and all of my coverage of the upcoming Kirk Cousins decision is going to keep y'all in mind. I have not forgotten about you, even though I disagree with you. If you are a Kirk lover, this is a positive to you, right? But for me, it's a negative because I don't think that they should keep Kirk Cousins, and I think this ups the odds that they are going to. I don't like that. If you like that, then that is going to obviously have a different effect on your opinion. And if it turns out that that's false, then this is the reverse thing, then this kind of changes my opinion too. If it turns out that Kevin O'Connell doesn't like Kirk Cousins and actually wants to trade him away, and Kwesi and they're all going to trade him away and they're going to start anew and do closer to what I want them to do at quarterback, which again, a conversation for a later day to go into detail on that. If that's the case, I kind of like this hire a lot more, but I still have my concerns. For one, he's very raw. Like, he is green as absolute hell. And in particular, he is green in the ways that like translate from coordinator to coach. And that's what I was worried about. A lot of, like, if you listen to the way that I broke down the other candidates, like Raheem Morris or D'Amico Ryans, I had the same concern about, and like Jim Harbaugh, I obviously didn't have the concern about. There are things that a head coach has to do that a coordinator typically does not have to do. And so I'm looking for evidence that this guy has any experience doing that, whether it's a head coach at a lower level or it's, somebody like Raheem Morris was involved in hiring processes as a position coach. It was just a thing that team did. And so he got that experience. And so I thought that was a big check mark for him. Kevin O'Connell doesn't really have experience like hiring, but more importantly, he doesn't have a lot of experience like managing the entirety of the team. But what it sounds like to me is that his job is to work with Sean McVay to come up with game plans and to work with Matt Stafford to install those game plans with the quarterback. And that's what the Rams are using their offensive coordinator to do, because their head coach is an offensive coordinator in Sean McVay, who can do a lot of the other classic things. So to me, like, if you are the run game O-line coach, are you reporting to Kevin O'Connell or are you reporting directly to Sean McVay? I don't know the answer to that question, but I do have that concern because now that O'Connell is a head coach, people are going to have to report to you. They're going to come to you with their problems. You're going to have to manage them. You're going to have to figure out what to do when they're pissed off about something. You're going to have to resolve conflicts between people. And I don't know if Kevin O'Connell has that experience or not. Notice how I'm saying that. I don't know if he has that experience or not. If it turns out, no, he totally does have that experience and you just failed to research it, you dumb dingus, then sure, I take all of that back and that's no longer a concern of mine and I'll adjust my opinion of this hire accordingly. But I could find with other candidates that they did have experience dealing with that stuff. Like with Raheem Morris, one of the biggest knocks on him in Tampa Bay was that he couldn't deal with brash personalities. As a coach, as he matured, as he grew up, as he got into his 40s, he got a lot better at dealing with brash personalities, and you could kind of see that happen, and I could take that as evidence that, okay, he has that skill. Does Kevin O'Connell have that skill? I'm not sitting here telling you he absolutely doesn't, but sure doesn't look like he has any experience to hone that skill, so I would find it unlikely unless there's something out there that I haven't been able to find. But beyond all that, head coach being lead tactician, it sounds like it shares a big flaw with Mike Zimmer. And that flaw is, are you going to come in as a head coach and just be the guy you were as a coordinator, do that job, and then that's your job and you're basically super coordinator, right? That's ultimately what doomed Mike Zimmer here. The offense felt ignored because he was a defensive coordinator who kind of just wanted to be the defensive coordinator with an offensive guy that reported to him that was really in charge of it. When he had that, things could work pretty well, like with Gary Kubiak, who could just kind of be offense czar, just be, he was even assistant head coach, and it was kind of a dual thing. I'm head coach defense, you're head coach offense, and together we create the Vikings. And that was all fine, but obviously when you didn't have that, things totally fell apart. And look, everybody's excited about this being an offensive head coach because now, even if you lose offensive coordinators, you still have continuity on the kind of vision on the offensive side of the ball, and that's all well and good. But you're going to lose defensive coordinators now. I mean, look at the Vikings wish list. It was almost all defensive coordinators. Defensive coordinators still get hired, y'all. And now you're going to have continuity problems on that side of the ball. And I personally find that to be much more of a concern than a lot of the people who are very sick of continuity on defense. I don't think that's something we should take for granted, and it's something that's going to be a lot harder to maintain. The thing about this is I am not going to let my initial read on the situation define how I feel about this hire forever. He has all the chance in the world to win me over. Go out, win some games. Kevin O'Connell, head coach of the Vikings. I'll be rooting for you. And I obviously will give this a chance to succeed. I have my skepticisms, and here they are. They're written down, and we can go revisit them when it comes to, this time next year, and we can we're talking about how did Kevin O'Connell's first year go. We'll go revisit all of those things. But from here on out, I'm probably just going to cover this neutrally and say this is who he is, this is what he wants to do, this is the kind of team he wants to build, and just try to inform you and make it so that you can make your own decisions about whether or not you like that stuff. The first thing that I want to do, and if I get time, this will be tomorrow's show, is I want to look at that McVay offense in the last couple of years and really evaluate how they approached and attacked defenses. I came away from watching the Vikings-Rams game when I watched all that tape I mean, I was furious with the Vikings, so a lot of it was just like screw Clint Kubiak stuff. But when I saw the defensive side of the ball and what Sean McVay did on the passing side of the ball, and what that offense did passing wise, they had so many good ways of attacking man match coverage, which is everywhere in the league now. That would be the meta. And so I think if I'm going to get won over by Kevin O'Connell, it's going to be by looking at the way that they attack man match coverages, realizing that basically every team on your schedule runs that, and realizing that, hey, he might be really good at attacking these, and whatever system he runs, he's good at those concepts. And in that Vikings-Rams game, I should mention, Matt Stafford was bad, so he missed a bunch of those throws, but those throws were there. And that is a sign of really, really being able to out-scheme those coverages that we have spent so long like trying to learn over the last like couple months of this podcast. I'm sort of going off on a little bit of a tangent. All of this is to say the next thing for me, and therefore the next thing for you, dear listener, to learn alongside me, is to learn the McVay offense. To learn the ins and outs of rushing, which isn't all that different from what we're used to here, but there are still some key differences. But mostly understanding how they put passing schemes together to attack the typical coverage schemes that we're going to see. We're going to talk a lot about the passing game, and I think that's going to be really exciting to a lot of people because this guy's a quarterback's coach. So we're going to be talking about the quarterback play, and I'm excited to see, I don't know if it's Kirk Cousins or if it's somebody else, what he wants to do at the quarterback position. All of this is rambling and kind of getting away from me, so we'll talk about all that stuff tomorrow. In the meantime, check out the Locked On Bets podcast. Don't forget to check out Super Week all over the Locked On network. I'll see y'all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.